For those of you who don't know me, I'm a faculty member in the Department of Agriculture Economics at Kansas State, so it's a convenient trip over. And I honestly don't consider myself an expert on biosecurity economics. I'll give you a little more background before I show you the slide. But I am starting to spend more time there. And to help understand, I guess, part of why that is very, very loosely related to that story, because I reside in Manhattan, Kansas. You probably know Plum Island's infrastructure is in the process of being moved there. And with that, there's a whole host of animal disease, biosecurity, agroterrorism, host of those kind of things that increasingly show up on campus, that I increasingly show up at the meetings on and hear about, and so on and so forth. So in that space, I have made the decision to start spending more time in this space. So I suspect I'm going to learn more in the next decades. So I'm a fairly young guy, and I look forward to learning a lot. That being given to you as a disclaimer, one thing I will tell you that's a backdrop for everything I'm going to show you here, my general observation for a lot of stuff that we talk about in biosecurity is from a animal throughput, maintained supply perspective. It comes from vet insights, animal science insights, and the like. And those are all very important. Epidemiologists and so on and so forth. That's all very important to this. But I also think it's incredibly important to also understand the human component. Not so much the human health. I mean, I do care about that. That's not what I'm talking about. But the human incentive to engage. So Jim made a comment about, I'm not going to call the vet until I've had multiple cases. There's going to be a delayed reaction. Those are all examples of the human incentive to engage in this. And as a geeky economist, I think I can put economic rationale behind all of that. And I think it's important that we at least pause and think about that some. So what I'm going to do in my first few slides here is to give you some of those general thoughts about how I think about that and how hopefully we can improve the level of implemented biosecurity as well as compliance once it's put in. Because it's one thing to put it in, it's another thing to quit doing it 2 days later, right? So you got to have the ongoing incentives to maintain stuff. First of all, it's very important to recognize we have private decisions that are critical that may not align with what USDA, APHIS, and other groups, right, necessarily would like to see. And the reason for that is a private livestock producer, doesn't matter if it's small ruminant or not, is going to make a decision where their benefits, that says equal, well, they got to be equal or greater than my cost. In econ speak, you make decisions until the marginal benefits are equal to the marginal cost. I keep throwing money at something until it's no longer worth it, basically. Well, that logic holds in many, many places, but it only partially captures impacts I have on my neighbors, the broader industry, and so on and so forth. So I choose to believe, I grew up on a swine farm in Missouri, that most livestock producers are quote-unquote good people. They don't mean ill for the producers, so on and so forth, and they'll take those things into account. But I will also choose to believe the average livestock producer does not make a lot, and they only have a certain amount of resources to do those quote-unquote extra things. So I will do some stuff that is favorable for my neighbor if I can afford to, and you can't always afford to. So when you put all those caveats around it, ultimately, the what is good for my operation explains a lot of the net behavior that we observe from an individual producer's perspective. The second piece of this would be just because something works, and we're talking biosecurity for a moment, so if you implement separation, right, so if you do quarantine new animals, for example, that's been shown it's effective, okay? That doesn't mean that it'll be implemented. And again, Dr. Logan's example is a prime one, so I'll just keep using those because I was fortunate to catch part of his talk, is it's not sufficient for us to identify and or develop things that are effective and reduce risk. We also need to have an eye on what's feasible / practical, right? What's understood or what they're aware of. And at the end of the day, I'm going to argue, because I'm an economist, what's the net economic value, both privately and publicly, of those measures, okay? I would assert that that separation or lack thereof, right, of quarantine practices partially reflects pragmatic feasibility and net economic perceptions to those producers. There's ways to influence that, but I think that's a barrier at the moment. Another one that's a prime example, and this one gets me in trouble sometimes, but myself and a colleague, Ted Schroeder at K-State, have done a couple studies. We've done a lot of work in the food safety realm. E. coli is obviously very big in the beef industry. And there are vaccines that are proven to quote-unquote work that you can give to fed cattle in the feedlot, and they will reduce shedding. And the net impact of that is a lower risk of E. coli in our meat supply chain. It sounds alarmist when I share with you we largely don't use them. I'm not trying to be alarmist, I'm trying to make a point. Simply because we develop a tool that is proven to be effective does not guarantee it's going to be used. And I would argue the reason it's not used currently is there's not an economic incentive for the average feedlot operator to use that. Now, that could change in the future. right? But that's a prime example, or it's not sufficient just to develop new tools that work. That's a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition for us to improve biosecurity. We need things that work, but there also needs to be an economic reason for people to implement them and remain compliant and use them. Okay, the other big one here, and there's supposed to be a red arrow through that, does not equal, is the private incentives don't often fully align. Sometimes they're actually at odds with the public incentives. One example would be, since I just raced back over here from the swine committee meeting, I was talking about economics PDV, is the average hog producer who had a moderate to a small PDV outbreak actually had a better than expected year in the year of PDV. And the reason for that is they had a hog price rally that more than offset their cost changes. Now, if you lost your entire operation, that's not the case. But for a lot of operations, a small impact actually was a positive compared to what I expected. No producer is going to raise their hand saying, yes, I want PDV. I'm not trying to say that. But at the end of the day, right, the banker was happy, basically, compared to what he was expecting September of 2013. USDA, on the other hand, if they go in and they implement things like indemnity payments and so on and so forth, they don't want higher hog prices. Because if you have something that goes on a long time, what they got to make payment on is higher. Right? By the time you figure out indemnity value and fair market value and so on and so forth. So simply looking at the output price of an animal has two different impacts on the two different groups. Producers want a higher price, obviously. USDA, all else equal, would like to come help and clean up things, but keep indemnity payments lower because they have a budget constraint as well. Right? So those things are at odds. There's lots and lots of those examples. Another one to think about, and I actually think the last time that I gave a talk at NIAA was about individual animal identification. So I'll pick a little bit on the beef industry to make my point, is there's probably been decades, some of you in the room could talk about this longer than I can, of interest in implementing more individual animal ID and traceability in the cow-calf sector. For the entire beef industry, let's just talk cow-calf for a moment. And to date, that's been partially realized, as I'll be polite and call it partial. One of the reasons for that would be the economic incentive for some cow-calf producers is to not implement it, because their cost to implement it exceed their benefits if they do. It's a harsh reality. And the real challenge here is, some of the work I've done with, again, other people over at Economics at K-State, is if the entire beef industry had a fully functioning animal ID system, and they could maintain a market like South Korea as an export market, which is 6-7% of what we export. So in the grand scheme, it's a big country, but grand scheme, it's a small import in the story. That would more than cover the cost of putting ID in. So when I tell the story of what's good for the industry in aggregate, it's very easy to make the point, we need ID and traceability to keep our trading partners happy, right, to keep product flowing and so forth. But as soon as you back up and say, okay, that's true in aggregate, but will all 100% cow-calf producers, all 100% feedlot operators, so on and so forth, be better off? The answer is no. Because roughly a third, the way we calculate it, cow-calf producers actually have too high of a cost to implement individual animal ID, such that those costs are higher than the marginal benefit they would get from maintaining market access. So their economic incentive is to protest. Right? I think the exact same holds on biosecurity. So I'm purposely giving you some examples that aren't biosecurity because I think the economic stories are all the same. And I actually am also giving you ones that aren't small ruminant because I don't think it matters if it's small ruminant or if it's cattle or what. The logic is the same. By the way, feel free to ask me questions. Okay?
So in the swine industry, exports up to 25%.
Depends on the year, but yes, we did 25%.
So that would kill. I mean, that would be horrendous if we had to stop export of pork right now.
Yes, it would be a big impact.
But
now, sidebar,
the Chinese own the swine industry in North Carolina.
Well, they're buying it.
bought Smithfield, the largest processing plant in the United States. That all goes offshore.
Yeah, they're interested in growing. I mean, I don't want to go too far with that particular comment, because his point holds even if that is true. Is any impact on exports?
Brazil. Come on.
Yeah. Actually, I think my last slide actually talked about trade, but all meat-producing industries are going to have an interest in expanding exports. If you believe the notion that the world's going to have more people, which I do, if you believe the notion that those people want to eat, which I do, and if you think the one's a little more divisive, that economic growth might be faster outside the U.S. than in it, and that's more of a mixed bag. There's a lot of people that think that. Then meat protein demand is going to be faster growing outside the U.S. than in it. So it doesn't matter if you're a sheep producer, beef producer, pork producer, whatever, you're going to have interest in expanding exports, which I'm of that camp. then anything that kills your exports is going to hurt you more 5 years from now than it does now. Yeah. Really long way of saying, yes, I agree. All right. I'm purposely long-winded, hopefully make the point deeper. So Paul asked me to talk about something that, again, I'll give a disclaimer, I've never even looked at, but I'm going to try to talk through it because I think it's instructive to think about it. And is, where does regionalization come in when we do risk analysis and when we're thinking about biosecurity, maybe for the country as a whole? So maybe let's move away from biosecurity of individual operation and trying to protect the U.S. industry for a moment. There's a lot of examples where different governmental officials are asked to look at should we or shouldn't we import livestock and or meat from different regions of the world. Okay, and there's a lot of economic motives that those questions are posed to them. I want to share with you one study, and then I want to give you a thought exercise to kind of share what I think when I think through this. One is by Peyton Ferrier, if I'm pronouncing his name right. He's with USDA ERS, 2008 paper. And the key piece I want you to take from this slide is that quote at the bottom. Is a lot of people like to say somebody who's doing illicit trade is just a bad person, which might be true. I can't say that's not true. But I really want you to appreciate a lot of people do illicit trade because it pays. There's an economic motive for it, right? And probably everybody in this room has done something that is less than ideal morally at some point in your life, if you really were honest with yourself, because there's an economic incentive to do it. Over time, we probably grow, we do less of that, but when we're all 14, for example, just to pick on your teenage years, we've all done something because there's a motive, okay? So then it's important to appreciate that because there's going to be a human incentive to possibly smuggle. The reason I bring that up is if you ban imports from one region, but yet you take them from a neighboring region, economic incentives can grow for smuggling to expand, okay? And I don't think this is unique to small ruminants either, right? But I want to talk through that for a moment. Ferrier's paper goes on to tell us some conditions when smuggling might be more prevalent. I'm not going to get real geeky on you here. I'm just trying to respect his paper. But the point would be is, depending upon the supply and demand environment, depending upon how many countries that region trades with, and depending upon just how stiff the penalties are if you catch somebody, or the likelihood of catching them, then smuggling probabilities are going to vary. Right? That's a very general statement. But my point would be is, depending upon what region the U.S. chose to go in and ban imports of something from, you could have conditions that are right for smuggling to become prevalent. That's what I want you to take from that. Won't happen all the time, but we need to at least think about it. Okay? And to get ahead of myself a little bit, I want you to think about how regionalization itself might increase the smuggling. So, and I'm going to give you a thought example in a moment about how markets react when you ban something, of how somebody that didn't used to smuggle now might start smuggling. And I'm going to ask Mark to tell me how we bring this into a risk analysis. All right, so entertain me for a moment. Let's do a thought exercise on smuggling. Let's suppose we're in 2015. All of us work for USDA. We're trying to give U.S. best advice we can, okay? Region 1, and I'm not going to use country names because I don't want to create that problem with newspapers. Region 1 is a high-quality premium producer, right? So we trust their quality of what they're doing on the ground. We like their meat, doesn't matter what industry it is, okay? And we want to keep getting it. But they have a neighbor, let's call Region 2, that's landlocked and historically has to take their product physically through Region 1 to get to a port, to put it on a ship so that it gets to wherever in the world that meat's going to be consumed. Okay, so that's our situation. And in 2015, both regions are sending product to the U.S. Can we follow the backdrop here? Let's go further. And remember, you're talking economist up here, so you got to entertain me for a moment. If the first region is a premium producer, then they would get a higher price for the product. Right? So that's the default setting. And if Region 2 has to transport stuff through Region 1 to get it out, they absorb a transport cost. So those two caveats. So back in 2015, let's say there's a 30-cent per pound price spread between what a producer in Region 1 is getting and Region 2. Okay? I'm making up these numbers. I'm going to show you the impact if we bring in a ban. So now let's say the U.S. bans stuff in Region 2. So I put in bold what the new world might look like. Okay? So before there was a 30-cent spread, now I'm showing you how it could be a 60-cent spread. So the reason it could grow to 60, get my laser to work, is the region we banned producers there used to get 70 cents per pound. Now they get 50 cents because people in the U.S. will not take their product, and the U.S. used to be a major buyer. So they've lost a major demand source of their product. Value of their products go down. Okay? Conversely, Region 1 might actually get a 10% bump because the U.S. no longer takes from Region 2. They need to find an alternative source of stuff they like. So demand for product of Region 1 goes up. Region 1 gets higher demand. Region 2 gets lower demand. The net of that is a growth in that price spread, right? Nowhere in there did I say, price of fuel doubled or anything like that. So the 20-cent transport cost did not change. So we went from 30 cents to 60 cents. What used to be a 10 cent, premium on quality has now grown, right? It's now 40, 60 off the 20 cents to haul. So if there used to take 15 cents to incentivize somebody to smuggle, in 2015 that incentive didn't exist. Now it does. You follow me? I can make up the numbers anyway to make that point. I'm trying to get you to see how if you ban product from one region, depending upon exactly how those prices respond, you can actually create an incentive for somebody to smuggle. I'm not for smuggling. That's not the point of this. It's to appreciate the fact that if you go in and you influence markets, because that's what I'm talking about here, you actually might get somebody who's never been a smuggler before to become a smuggler. Everybody follow the point here? All right. So my $1 million question, and it's easier to ask questions than answer them, is how should potential smuggling activity be incorporated in risk analysis? And I have no clue how to do that.
Well, this is where...
But I think it's important we think about it. That's what I want to accomplish here. Okay.
Having worked for USDA, I know there's an organization called the Smuggling Interdiction and Trade Compliance that they find about 1 to 2% of things smuggled into the U.S. Then that, using those figures, you're not going to... It's going to be tough to figure out what the total risk assessment is.
Right. But the fact that there is some awareness that happens and it's considered is good. What I would want us to go further is depending on where, so again, this is a purely academic exercise I'm giving you, but depending on where you impose that ban, the economic situation could be that now there's a 20% smuggling rate. Right? That's really what I'm trying to get across, is the specific case potential ban probably has a different smuggling likelihood that needs to be considered beyond just historic smuggling behavior.
Well, then Region 1 would also ask Region 2 for product that they don't have enough to produce, so they smuggle stuff from Region 2 into Region 1 and sell it to the U.S., so it still gets here anyway. Yeah. It just comes through a different way.
But it's still smuggling.
It's still smuggling.
Right. Now the question there is who do we go after to blame and so forth, right? Who has to do what is what's germane there, but it's still product that came from the region we're trying to ban, right? That's what I want to try to get across. The second kind of question is maybe this influences the size of the region that we put the ban in. So if you pause and think about this for a moment, depending on the situation, not only should we define the region we ban on based upon epidemiological type concerns, which is normally what's done, right? Maybe we also need to go a step further and take into account the likely smuggling behavior and account for that when we draw the border. Again, that's going to be site specific, so I don't have a one-size-fits-all solution for that. But I think if you take only this is where the animals are located, this is the animal disease pattern, so forth, approach, and you ignore some of the other economics like smuggling, you've missed an opportunity to reduce some of the aggregate risk we're talking about. That's the only point I'm trying to get across. And hopefully I've accomplished that. But believe it or not, I can usually get more animated. I've probably made this pretty clear. I actually have more questions than I have answers on this. I've tried to give you the disclaimer. I don't consider myself an expert here. I'm just talking out loud like an economist thinks about these. I think there's more questions that economists have than they have answers. But risk is very, very multidimensional. And if we ignore some of those dimensions, that's a real problem. My last one, and I've already made this point a little bit before on trade, but I feel compelled to put it in red and bold, is if we're not careful how we approach regionalization and banning and approaches to smuggling and so forth, we can come across as protectionistic. We've got to be very, very careful about that. Not just us in the room, just in general, the U.S. I'm a firm believer U.S. livestock producers are going to be more dependent on trade in the future than they are now, and therefore we need to be pro-trade, not anti-trade. And you got to be careful not to have these discussions that come across as anti-trade. So that's a big kind of warning in the next round of these discussions, is you can improve risk analysis and you can make our efforts to ban certain regions better, but you got to be careful not to do it in a way that comes across as something that's disguised as protectionism.